I'd like to welcome Magdalena, and apologies if I mispronounce your name, Rzaca. I'm going to go with Rzaca. I'm going to try. You can correct me. To talk about embracing open source software for sustainability. She is an expert in privacy and intellectual property and an OSS enthusiast. Welcome to the stage. You should be, yeah, should be right there.
Good morning. So my name is Magdalena Rzaca, and I wanted to speak today about open source, how open source is the future, open source software is the future. And I will focus on how embracing open source software can help us with sustainability. So just before I will ask this question, as it is mentioned, I am working in my day-to-day work in privacy and intellectual property. And I also see how open source software is undervalued and not properly understood. But I would like to ask you, have you heard about Jitsi? Please just raise your hand. Oh, I know that this is an educated crowd, so this is open source software used for teleconferencing. So I'm happy that you have heard about it. Have you heard about DGID? It's a Dutch thing, so it makes sense that less people have heard about it. Just last year, this application used to identify citizens was made open source, which I think in general is a great direction for any government. So focusing more on open source software, I would like to highlight what are the top advantages. And even though I think there are so many discussions about open source software, I think we still need to highlight this. So I think first of all, it's innovation. Another one is, of course, transparency, because you can really just download the code, see what's there, see really what data is collecting, how the processing is taking place. And of course, I think the biggest argument, and of course, if you have any doubts, and money is always a good argument. So open source is really helping with cost saving. Focusing on the other side, which is what are the challenges of open source software, I would say the biggest challenge is awareness. And it's not only including what open source software is, but also how properly use it in terms of applying the proper license, because also not every license out there is considered as open source software license. So another challenge is, of course, securing funding. And it's not only for the project, but securing the life cycle of the whole project. I already mentioned the licensing. So I think licensing is very confusing, even for the people who do open source software. I mean, they are developers. And I am working in legal role, and I see how much needs to be still done to just prepare people with the knowledge and with practical tips how they can apply how they can choose license and how they need to apply it in proper terms. Because if we see on the numbers, and most of the open source software is hosted on GitHub, but then if we look more closely and look into the licensing file, we can see that, well, maybe it was intended to be open source, but the license is not clear, and we might be in risk to, if you want to then reuse the software. And I think the latest challenge that I wanted to highlight today is building community. I think open source, of course, is relying on volunteers, but I think building the knowledge and keeping the community, which of course is connected with funding, it's a challenge as well. And I would like to put you back in to 2020 when Corona started, and basically the race for Corona tracking app started. And as we see, we can clearly see that there were a lot of efforts to create a tracking app, and many open source software applications were created, which I think is great. But I cannot stop asking myself the question, what if we could really act as one community and dedicate effort on creating one, and then the rest of the resources dedicated to really fighting the corona? I would like to focus now on UK perspective, because I think, first of all, Open UK is producing amazing reports about open source software, but also I think UK is really a pioneer when it comes to open source software. And if we will look into this figure relating to open source program office, we can see that more than 68% of the organization, they have open source program office, which is amazing because, first of all, they are mature enough to have open source program office. I'm still advocating for that in my organization. And then they can clearly reply that, yes, we have, which means that they know what open source is. And, well, of course, they know what is open source program office. And I think another great trend is that open source is used for a long, like since many years already in many organizations. It's more than 22% of organizations who respond to survey. They are using open source for more than 15 years. And talking about money again, because open source is really helping saving us money, and I think it's an important topic of this in sustainability discussion. There is no doubt that there is great relation of benefits versus cost when it comes to use of open source software. So just in UK, we see that 67% of the organization replied that the benefits are greater than the costs of open source. And I think I would just to highlight that really there is a lot of money in open source, and I think UK government is taking advantage of it. I mean, it's really acting in more aware way. But I would like to just highlight the last, when it comes to the money argument, that just last year, the value added by open source software was more than 13 billion of pounds, which is a lot of money. But for talking about the future and open source, we cannot avoid the topic of artificial intelligence. And I think there is no future without education. And I would really like to see application of open source AI solutions for personalized training. I would like to imagine a world where basically each kid with neurodiversity or having particular challenges in learning has access to software that is tailor-made to her or him. And that brings me to my last point. What can be done for open source software and sustainability? As the previous speakers highlighted that legal perspective is important, I think it's very important. And again, I need to say that UK government is doing really well because at least they are consulting the stakeholders about how the things can be changed and improved. And I think adding relevant criteria to public procurement regarding open source, regarding sustainability is a great step. But I think each and every organization can do even more. They can implement relevant criteria relating to open source software as well as to sustainability in their own internal procedures. And I think all of us should look into detail for the phase 4 of the Open UK report, which will be available in November. But as we are talking about sustainability, I would like to ask a question now. Can we ensure sustainability for the future? I don't know the answer for this question, but if I think about sustainability, I would like to refer to definition prepared in '87 by United Nations as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of meeting the needs of future generations. And I would like to think not only about the sustainability of the open source software projects, but sustainability in a greater way, which is embracing human health and also climate and economic growth. So I don't know if we will succeed, but I think that, as Al Gore said, a will to act is in itself a renewable resource. And as I see a room full of people, of willing people, I hope there is a future for us. Thank you very much.